What happens when someone with a mind sharp enough to get into Harvard at just 16? What happens when they decide the world is, well, beyond repair? And what if that same person, that same brilliant mind, then spends like 17 years mailing bombs that no one can figure out, no one can stop?
It's chilling to even contemplate.
Right, and this isn't your typical terrorist story. This is about someone who apparently genuinely believed they were trying to save humanity through destruction.
A kind of reluctant savior, in his own view.
Exactly. So you really need to stick with us on this one, because figuring out how that happens, what's maybe more unsettling than you'd think.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's dive in. Way back before the FBI even had a name for the Unabomber, there was just Ted.
And what's so fascinating right from the beginning is this picture of almost classic early brilliance.
Yeah.
Born in Chicago, 1942.
Working class background.
Yeah, working class. But clearly an exceptional kid. He skipped 2 grades. Think about that.
2 grades. Wow.
So by 16, he's not just starting college. He's at Harvard.
16 at Harvard.
Yeah. So you've got this really young man stepping into this world of, older students, established intellects. It just screams intellectual horsepower, even back then.
It really does. But you have to wonder, what was that like socially?
Exactly. You can picture him, right? Maybe a bit awkward, probably more comfortable with books than parties.
Probably. That accelerated track, it put him in a totally different social scene at Harvard.
And the sources say he was pretty isolated, by all accounts.
Yeah, isolated. And here's where it gets really disturbing. The materials mention these brutal psychological experiments he was part of.
Yes. The Murray experiments.
Right, and some accounts suggest they were actually designed to sort of break down the thinking of these young guys, to remold them.
It's a deeply unsettling idea, isn't it? That level of psychological manipulation.
It really is. And it raises that huge question. Did they succeed? Did those experiments fundamentally change Ted Kaczynski?
Well, it's impossible to know for sure, but it's a profound question.
Yeah.
You have someone already maybe feeling alienated.
Right.
And then you put them in what could be a highly traumatic situation. Psychologically traumatic. It feels like a really significant moment.
A turning point.
Potentially, yeah. Think about it, late adolescence, identity is still forming, maybe a bit fragile. And then you introduce experiments designed to challenge, even dismantle, that sense of self. The sources certainly lean towards the idea that the Ted Kaczynski who entered Harvard wasn't quite the same one who left. What hits you most about that period?
For me, it's just that image. Someone so incredibly bright being used like a lab rat, almost. It's disturbing to think the place meant to, nurture his mind might have actually maybe inadvertently pushed him towards towards unraveling.
The paradox.
But he didn't just crack that. He kept going. Got a PhD, right? In math.
Advanced mathematics from the University of Michigan. A field most people find pretty impenetrable.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And he even got a job teaching. Berkeley. Assistant professor.
Which sounds like, the expected path. High achievement, prestigious position.
Exactly. It looks like success, right? Like he's on track.
On the surface, yes. The PhD, Berkeley, these are big markers of conventional success. But what's really striking is how fast he leaves it all behind.
Right. Just 2 years at Berkeley and poof, he's gone.
Walks away, completely vanishes from that world. He just severs the ties, academia and technology, all of it, and heads for the wilderness in Montana.
It's such a dramatic shift. From Berkeley lecture halls to this tiny hand-built cabin, like really basic.
10 by 12 feet, the sources mention. No electricity, no running water, nothing modern.
It's a total rejection, a complete turn away from the industrial society he'd later attacked so fiercely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about escaping, was it? This was also a time where his ideas really started to solidify.
Yeah, the sources point to that. This isolation became like an incubator for his ideology.
Precisely. He wasn't just, chopping wood and living simply. He was deeply thinking, formulating this whole critique of modern technology.
Seeing it as dehumanizing, stripping away freedom.
Exactly. Leading society towards disaster, in his view. And the intensity of that belief, formed out there in the woods, it's quite remarkable.
And crucially, it didn't just stay as philosophy in a notebook. That conviction, it seems, morphed into a plan, a sort of war against the system. But not protests, not politics.
No, his weapon was much quieter and much more terrifying. Homemade bombs sent through the mail.
Seemingly random targets. It's almost impossible to grasp that leap, isn't it? From an idea, however extreme, to that kind of violence.
That transition is always the hardest part to understand, from belief to action. But what's really unsettling here, reading the sources, is how methodical it was.
Right, it wasn't impulsive.
Not at all. This was a deliberate, calculated, long-term campaign, fueled by this deep-seated and increasingly radical worldview he built in isolation.
And it starts in 1978. Bang, a package explodes at Northwestern University. Seemingly out of the blue.
And then it happens again. And again. For 17 years. These bombs just keep appearing. Universities, airlines, computer stores, corporate executives.
The targets seemed disconnected, which just ramped up the fear. Nobody felt safe.
16 bombs sent over that time. 3 people killed, 23 injured. And the FBI. They were completely stumped, chasing a ghost.
They had that nickname, right? Based on the early targets.
Unabomber. University and airline bomber. That's all they had for years. Unabomber.
And that name itself shows how they were trying to piece it together, focusing on the where and the how. But the sources really highlight the sheer frustration for law enforcement.
Oh, I bet. Think about the tech back then. No widespread internet, databases were limited.
Trying to track someone operating like that so sporadically, so unpredictably, a massive challenge.
And get this is wild. At one point, according to the sources, the FBI actually questioned him.
No way!
Yeah. Had him talk to him briefly about something unrelated, apparently, and they just let him go. Had no idea who they were face-to-face with.
Wow. Imagine if.
Right, how different things could have been. But no, Ted just slips away. And he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot.
That near miss is incredible. It really shows the role of chance, but also maybe Kaczynski's ability to just blend in when necessary, despite being such a recluse otherwise.
He was a ghost.
An enigma. Made him incredibly hard to catch.
Then, 1995. Everything changes. He sends this document, this huge text.
The manifesto.
Yeah, 35,000 words, sends it to the New York Times, Washington Post, and the demand was chilling. Publish this or the bombing continues. More people will die.
Talk about raising the stakes. A direct threat tied to getting his message out.
And the sources, they describe it as more than just, incoherent rambling. They call it things like a twisted masterpiece.
Because it was coherent. In its own way. It laid out his entire philosophy, his critique of industrial technological society.
And the dangers he saw.
Yeah. Loss of freedom, environmental destruction, the psychological costs of modern life. Themes that, frankly, resonate even more today, don't they?
Eerily so. Unchecked tech, surveillance, AI. He was talking about the seeds of this stuff decades ago.
And that's the really uncomfortable part the sources bring up, even as people were horrified by the bombs and the threat.
Some people read the manifesto and thought, well, he's not wrong about everything.
Exactly. People found themselves nodding along with certain points of his critique, even while condemning his actions. That's a very difficult thing to grapple with.
It really forces those tough questions. Was he just completely mad? Or was there some valid critique lost in the violence?
A classic case of the message versus the messenger.
But ultimately, it wasn't the FBI's detective work that caught him, was it? It wasn't profiling or forensics, not really.
No. The breakthrough came from somewhere much closer to home, much more personal.
His own brother, David Kaczynski.
David reads the manifesto after it's published, and he starts to get this horrible feeling. He recognizes the phrasing, the ideas.
The specific way his brother Ted wrote, his unique arguments.
Imagine that. The dawning horror. Suspecting your own brother as the Unabomber, this person terrorizing the country. The internal conflict must have been immense.
It's hard to even fathom. But he did the right thing. He went to the FBI.
Turned over letters, documents Ted had sent him years before, pointed out the similarities.
And just like that, after 17 years, the net finally closes. 1996, they raid that tiny cabin in Montana.
And it's all there. The bomb-making equipment, chemicals.
Detailed journals describing the attacks, the planning, even the typewriter he used for the manifesto.
The proof was undeniable. Game over, legally speaking.
Case closed, the Unabomber was caught.
Apprehended, yes, the investigation ends. But as the sources really emphasized, the story, the impact. It doesn't just stop there.
No, definitely not. So Ted Kaczynski pleads guilty, avoids the death penalty.
And he's sent to the Supermax prison in Colorado, ADX Lawrence. Life without parole, locked away.
Right. But here's that uncomfortable truth again, the one the sources keep circling back to. His warnings. The things in the manifesto about technology, society's direction.
They haven't exactly aged poorly, have they?
Not at all. If anything, they seem more relevant now. Big tech's power, AI ethics, constant surveillance. He was writing about this stuff in the early 90s.
It really makes you wonder, as the sources pose, did the sheer horror of his violence make us completely dismiss any legitimate points he might have raised, however crudely?
Did we just, throw the baby out with the bathwater because the bathwater was filled with bombs?
It's a harsh way to put it, but yeah. Or was it more conscious than that?
What do you mean?
Like, were we so repulsed, understandably, by the murders, by the terror, that we actively chose to ignore the message, even the parts that might have held uncomfortable truths? Because dealing with those truths alongside the violence was just too much.
A kind of willful blindness, maybe? Choosing comfort over a really ugly reality presented in the worst possible way.
It's a difficult ethical knot to untangle.
Yeah. And it leads right into that final, really chilling question the source material leaves us with. If someone else came along today with similar extreme views about technology, about societal collapse, would we even see the signs? Would we recognize the danger before it was too late?
That's the question that haunts, isn't it? Long after the case is closed, Kaczynski was a criminal.
Yeah.
A murderer, full stop.
Absolutely.
But his story, as the sources lay out, it's also this disturbing mirror reflecting our own relationship with technology, its power, its potential dangers.
He saw a future he was terrified of.
And used utterly horrific means to try and stop it. He failed, obviously failed in his methods. But the ideas stripped of the violence, echoes of those warnings, are still bouncing around today in our own anxieties about where we're heading.
And maybe that's the most unsettling part, that persistent relevance, that nagging feeling when we read his critique in light of, gestures vaguely everything happening now. Maybe that makes his ideas, in a strange way, more dangerous now while he's locked away than they ever were when he was building bombs in that cabin.
A truly chilling thought to end this deep dive on.